Hello, Cape Crusaders. Please join me in welcoming a very special guest to our show. He is the writer behind many episodes of the new Batman Adventures, Superman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond, The Zeta Project, and both Justice League shows for the DCAU, plus the writer for so many other well-known shows and characters. Please welcome Rich Fogel to the show. Rich, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming, man. So I was quite excited to chat with you today because... well, first and foremost, you worked on a scene that my brother and I absolutely love. A very important scene, in fact, where Batman and Superman meet for the first time in the DCAU. And I remember specifically seeing that for the first time as a kid in New Jersey. And I've always been a big Batman fan, obviously. I do the podcast on Batman the Animated Series, and I have grown to really love Superman, especially the DCAU version over the years. But I always felt like, man, Superman kind of got the best of Batman in that moment until we see that little tracer on Clark's neck and Batman's just there with binoculars and salutes him. It's just such a great moment. So I guess, how was that approach to you, and where did that idea and that scene come from?
Well, it was sort of sprung on us at the last minute that we were going to be doing new episodes of Batman. We were thick in the production of Superman at that point, and the network said, well, okay, we'll do some more Batman. And so in order to introduce that, we wanted to do this crossover show, the World's Finest. And it was something that was done very quickly. Alan Burnett and Paul Dini worked hard on the sort of overall structure of the story and everything like that. And then it was sort of all hands on deck. It was parceling things out. And it was just sort of the luck of the draw that I happened to get that scene in there. And I remember feeling like the weight of it at the time,
right,
oh my God,
right.
This is the first time that we're doing that. And I remember actually in the World's Finest comics, in one of the early versions, their version of the meeting of Superman and Batman for the first time, and they were like on a cruise ship, and they were sharing a room, and some emergency happens, and they catch each other changing mid things, and we're like, no, that's really stupid. We're not going to do that.
No, I can't believe that's in the comics. Oh my God, that sounds like a crap reality TV show you'd see or something like that. You know what I mean? Like on a boat and these two icons meeting for the first time. I much prefer your version.
So I mean, the sort of beats of it were laid out in the outline, the sort of beat outline that we had for it. But then I was able to sort of play around with it a lot, and particularly the staging of the fight in the bar or the restaurant, and some of the sort of interplay between them. It all went through pretty smoothly without a lot of changes afterwards. So we sort of hit that one.
Obviously, you had a treatment that was given to you by the producers, and so you knew, the beats you had to do. But the things like the tracer being on Superman, and that's how Batman discovers his identity and such like that, was that something that was conceived and you had to integrate into the story, or was that something that you integrated yourself?
I believe it was in the beat outline at that point, and so I just needed to sort of figure out how to convincingly stage it and put it in.
Make it cool. Yeah.
But one of the things that was really great about working on that series, Superman and the Batman, was that we had a very tight production unit, that everybody had been working on the show for a long time. The writers talked to the artists talked to the writers, and so it was always a case where, and I'll get into this a little bit later, usually we were all on the same page and sort of had a vision for where we were going. And, I think that, to think about how we were going to balance those two characters, that they're both stars, and we couldn't have like one of them making a chump out of the other. So it was always a balancing act to sort of make sure that when one was bested by the other, there was always a good reason for it. And particularly, because Superman is so powerful that Batman has to be, a little bit smarter.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And that plays really well in that film.
Yeah, but you don't want Clark to be a chump either.
No, absolutely not. You know, he is the Boy Scout, but he's also the Man of Steel, and I get that. It's a good balance, and I think you really walk that tightrope perfectly, to be honest. Because as much as you know, I've always been more on Batman's side and think he's the cooler hero. Um, as I said before, the Superman the Animated Series show just really kind of brought Superman more into like my world of being like, actually, this guy's pretty cool and he's got some cool villains and such. And that's all down to you guys writing that series and creating these stories that were more like, you know, the Batman show that I was watching before that. So when they met, that was a really cool moment because I'd only seen that in comics and I'd never seen them meet. It was just always, it was Super Friends, right? Like on TV or like it was in the comics and it's always Batman, Superman fighting side by side. So to see them square up against one another to begin with and and basically Superman hasn't faced any human that thinks he can best him in arm-to-arm combat, and then suddenly Batman throws him over to that table, you know, and Superman's like, what did this guy just do to me? You know, I love that. I think that's great.
It's true that, and we ran into this particularly with Justice League, is because of the way that DC developed over the years, that a lot of the sort of mythology behind the different characters was incompatible. And so when you just sort of put them together, there's a real feeling of mismatch about it, which is different than Marvel, where all of those characters were developed sort of in the same time frame and with the idea that they inhabited the same universe. And so it's always a challenge with DC characters to try and get them together and try and make sense out of it.
Yeah, I can see that, and I mean, you raised the challenge. Like, even just remembering Batman having that little bit of kryptonite, you know, where he's like, it doesn't take much, does it? And he's just testing Superman, like, how much of this hurts right now, you know? And that's just so Batman, just prepared for any situation. But obviously, Superman can do all those things that Batman can't do, and that's where, you know, that interplay as well. Like later on in that film, where Superman just busts down the door and Batman's like, you're learning. Like, oh, okay. Like, you know, you're picking up on this stuff. So, yeah, I love all of that.
Yeah, no, they have a very fun relationship and we had a good time playing around with it.
I bet, yeah. And you also worked on another team up of Batman and Superman, where you wrote the episode of Demon Reborn, where Ra's al Ghul steals Superman's powers, and great episode. Yes. One again, because these all belonged to Superman the animated series, and I didn't watch them as a kid. As an adult, I've discovered them, and it was like discovering new episodes of Batman that I didn't know existed. So I loved that episode. I thought it was really well done. It made sense to have Ra's al Ghul be the one that wanted to steal Superman's powers, and we chatted with Dan Reber on the podcast who directed that episode. He has some great things to say about it and some fun memories. But what do you remember about conceiving that story for that episode?
Actually, Dan was a big help in that one. He contributed a lot of good ideas to it sort of early in the story stages. I mean, my main memory, and this disappoints a lot of fans, but at that point, I was doing sort of cleanup work on the Superman series and was sort of finishing up a lot of the episodes because we were going into development of Batman Beyond at that point. And Alan and Paul and Bruce were sort of preoccupied with trying to get that off the ground. Again, everything was done at the last minute. Everything was rushed. And so basically the last few episodes, I sort of like shouldered the helm for that and did a lot of the heavy lifting on those stories. And so unfortunately for me, that one was just one of like, we need a story. We need to get it out the door. There's this idea for another Batman thing. Sure, let's do that. And,
I mean, look, you know, like, even though that may have been the way it came to be, it was one of my favorite episodes to watch, mainly because I guess I hadn't seen an episode of what that included Batman, so I didn't know it existed until much later. So maybe that was like carrying me through. But I thought it was great. Like, I liked the idea that Ra's al Ghul Like he's out of Lazarus pits. He wants to live forever. Who's the most powerful being in the world? It's Superman. Like that makes that sounds like a perfect story for a 22-minute episode, you know. And like
and for me it was a lot of fun because I hadn't had a chance to write any Ra's al Ghul episodes yet, and so having a chance to play with that character was a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, David Warner's performance as Ra's is just so good. So I really enjoyed that. So that's cool. You got to kind of play with Batman and Superman again. But I guess, I should have maybe asked this up top, but I'll ask it now. How did you get the job writing for, I suppose it was Superman was the first show that you started writing for in the DCAU. So how did that all come to be?
Well, I actually had worked with Alan Burnett, the producer, years before on Super Friends. And episodes.
Excuse me for I guess shitting on Super Friends earlier. Then I'm sorry, Rich.
No, it's it's perfectly fine. So Alan and I sort of got started around the same time in the animation business, and I met him like during his first season of editing Super Friends, and I did a few episodes for him, including the one that introduced Darkseid in that iteration of Super Friends. And for both Alan and me at the time, it was really frustrating because standard and practices were so strict that we couldn't do any of the things that we really wanted to do with those characters.
Right.
We knew them, we loved them, we wanted to tell good stories with them, and our hands were just tied, that you couldn't have them hit anything. You couldn't have them shoot anything. I even got a note that in the description, I had described Darkseid's ship as a dreadnought destroyer, and I got a note back that said, "You can't call it a dreadnought destroyer because that's too scary." And I said, but it's not in the dialogue, it's just in the description of it. No, you can't call it that. So that's how strict the standards and practices were on Super Friends. So anyway, I worked with Alan, and we worked in sort of parallel on shows over the years, intervening. We both went to Disney, where he worked on DuckTales and I worked on Gummy Bears. And then I went back to Hanna-Barbera and was working on some Flintstone movie specials. And he went back to Hanna-Barbera and worked on Pirates of Dark Water. And then he got the opportunity to go and work on Batman. But I was still under contract at Hanna-Barbera at the time. And so I was not able to work on that first iteration of Batman, the animated series. And it just killed me because I was like a big fan. And
that's where you want to be. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I was watching when the stuff came out, I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing what they're actually doing there. But anyway, I was still working on other things at the time. And then when Superman started up, I got to talking with Alan, and he was like, well, you want to write an episode of Superman? And I was like, hell yeah, I would love to. And so I wrote the first episode where Brainiac comes to Earth, Stolen Memories, and they liked that. And so during the first season of Superman, I did a number of freelance episodes for them. And then in the second season, I was brought on as a story editor for it. And so that's how I got hooked into it. And then the fact that they brought Batman back and we're going to start doing new episodes was like, I was the most excited one of all, because they're all like, oh my God, we've got to figure out what to do with more Batman episodes. We've done so many Batman episodes. And I was like, I get to write Batman.
And you did. I mean, the episodes that we'll talk about here, we'll get into that. Well, I guess my first question for you is, you got to introduce Tim Drake. You got to introduce the new Robin into the DCAU and the Bat family, really, because we had some Batgirl before, but not like Batgirl is fighting side by side with Batman. She was like a little vigilante type thing. So yeah, I guess let's start with that episode with Tim Drake being introduced. How was that brought to you, and What do you remember about crafting that whole episode?
Well, the series was sold as being like, okay, now we're going to do basically the Bat family, and the artwork that was promoting it had Robin and Batgirl and Batman all together in it, and and we can get into this later. Some of the artwork even included the Creeper as part of the Bat family, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. Yeah, but the idea was that he was going to be a major character in this as well. So
wow, I wonder what the thought behind that was, because we will get into that because I know that's one of your episodes. But that's really interesting. I didn't know that he was going to be a proper member of the Bat family at one point. That's crazy.
Yeah. So anyway, we needed to introduce them, and again, it was sort of like, I don't know whether it was luck of the draw or whatever, but they assigned me to work on the Tim Drake one, and we discussed it a lot and hashed it out. I do remember that in the early premise stage of it, there was some discussion about who the villain should be in this one. And at one point, it was the Joker, and then we said no. I think Bruce said no, we don't want it to be the Joker. That's too on the nose. So then we switched it to Two-Face, and and that worked out pretty well. And there was a lot of discussion about who we wanted Tim Drake to be. And again, because there's so much material in the comic books, I mean, it's part of our job, and this is like a dream job, was to read all the comic books from current all the way back to the beginning, so that we could sort of try and go back to the core of what the characters could be. Because when there's so much material being churned out, characters sort of get barnacles on them. They get things appended onto them that weren't originally part of the idea and stuff like that. And so we looked at the Tim Drake origin story, and it wasn't really resonating with us that much. The origin that we ended up with is a little closer to the Jason Todd origin story, but we grafted it onto Tim Drake because it seemed to be a more compelling story.
But and I guess if you're doing Jason Todd, it's only going to go one way, right? If you're using that character. And not that kids would have known that Robin died, which probably would have been very shocking for a kid to see the death of Robin in a cartoon series. But for a lot of because there were a lot of young adults and teenagers that watched the show as well, they would have known. And I think that's why, in Spider-Man, the animated series, they didn't put Gwen Stacy in as the love interest. They put Mary Jane because everyone's going to know that Gwen Stacy's going to die, right? So, I think it was a wise choice to go to Tim Drake, and he's such a great Robin, and he's so different from Dick Grayson. But he's got some Jason Todd isms in him as well, which I thought was very clever.
Yeah. So I think that, luckily DC gave us the freedom to not be stuck to, one particular canon on these things, that we could sort of create our own versions of them. We had earned a lot of trust by that point. And we had I don't want to say mandate, because that's not really what it was, but the network really wanted to make Batman more kid friendly. The knock on Batman over the years was that kids couldn't relate to him. And I don't know what kids they've been talking to, because every kid I've ever seen, loves dressing up as Batman, loves playing with Batman. They have no issues with it. But there was this idea that Batman was too scary and too, not relatable. And so
that's crazy. As your target audience, right? I was your target audience back then as a kid. And I never once was like, I wish I could see more Robin, because then I can see myself fighting alongside Batman. I just was watching it, and either I was just enjoying watching Batman, or I was like, I can't wait to grow up and be Batman, right? I want to be Batman. Yes. I don't want to be Robin. I mean, Robin's a great character, and especially as I've gotten older, I've really appreciated Robin as a character, both Dick Grayson and Tim Drake in the DCAU. But yeah, I don't know who they were talking to or what they were doing back then either, because I've heard this from other guests before, and it's like you guys were doing the best job ever. Like, stop messing with it, like you just leave them alone and let them do their thing.
We had a mandate to try and feature some, more Batgirl, more Robin, more Nightwing, and stuff like that. So, this was a way of introducing that in there. And, we spent a lot of time trying to get it right. And this was the first time that I had written Batman for the DCAU. And I still had a lot of those standards and practices, voices whispering in my ear at that point. And I think I was holding back a little bit in this episode. And they kept saying, no, do more. And I'm like, really? Okay.
Right.
And, so things about putting kids in danger and things about, people hitting each other and all of that kind of stuff. And so, we ended up sort of really going for it. And I think it worked out well.
I totally agree. I think Sins of the Father is a great episode. We had the voice of Tim Drake, Matt Valencia, on a little while ago, and he spoke about the first day in that recording booth, and that's the first episode. I know he did the Christmas one before that, but like that was his episode, right? Like the first big episode would say, "This is about me," and he was like a 12-year-old kid, and it's crazy, and
he was so good in it.
So good. I mean, such an incredible performance, amazing Robin. I was going to ask you, when you were writing Tim Drake's dialogue, like, did Matt Valencia's voice kind of match up with what you were thinking when you were writing that character?
Yeah, absolutely. At the point where we were writing that, they hadn't recorded a lot yet, so we didn't really know what he sounded like. But but I was really pleased when I heard it, that he had the right energy, the right enthusiasm, and the right amount of sarcasm, and it was it was great.
Yeah, I think Matt's attitude at points, like that's where your Jason Todd kind of comes in, with some of the attitude. Like that's that side of Tim Drake that you put some Jason Todd in. But yeah, it was an excellent performance. It's a great episode. I mean, I always love seeing Two-Face. I'm obviously going to ask you about Judgment Day as we go through these episodes, because I think that's an incredible episode. But yes, it's always great to see Two-Face, because he's the best version of Two-Face I've ever seen is in this show, hands down. And, he's not used loads, but when he is used, he's used perfectly. And I thought he was the right villain for Tim Drake and his dad dying, I guess. I guess Tim Drake's dad is dead, but yeah, you can't say
he is definitely dead.
Yeah. But I thought that was perfect. He's like a gangster and he's mixed up with the wrong people in Two-Face's gang, not like an elaborate scheme by the Riddler or the Joker or something. So yeah, I thought that was good.
Yeah. I did get some criticism on that show from some fans that it wasn't Two-Face enough, but since it wasn't really a Two-Face centric episode, we really had to devote the time to Robin and Batman developing their relationship.
Absolutely. And it is I think it's I disagree with fans that are saying that. I mean, everybody's got their opinions, but Two-Face is setting off a bomb with 2 different types of liquids, and he wants I think it's $2 million, or he's going to blow up at the Gotham City at 2 a.m. Lots of twos. Yep. That's his MO. That's his thing.
Yeah, we put as many twos in as we could.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Yeah, and then there's a line where Robin keeps on referring to Two-Face's puke face. And I think that I've always loved that. And is that something that was that crafted and given to you, or was that something that you came up with when writing that episode?
It wasn't given to me, but I don't remember at what point it came in. I don't remember whether I put it in or whether that was something that Paul Dini added.
It's a great nickname, though.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing that's so great about it is that it really sort of crystallizes this Robin's attitude, which is he's not intimidated by anything. He doesn't respect anything. And, He's just
he's a kid, yeah, who's like 13 and thinks he rules the world. Like, as you do at 13, right? You're like, I'm a teenager now. I know everything. You're like cocky, and it's great. I really love that version of Tim Drake. So moving on to the next one, you introduced Firefly and the Creeper into the DCAU, two characters that I mean, I didn't really know much about until I saw these episodes, particularly Creeper. I had no idea about his backstory and that it was related to the Joker. So with those two separate episodes with those two characters, what memories can you share with us, with writing those episodes and introducing those characters?
Well, again, I because I did not work on the original iteration of the animated Batman, one of the things that I was interested in doing was seeing if there were any of the Rogues Gallery that hadn't been used yet that could be effective. And I really thought that Firefly could be good, and came up with this story, which was an interesting, which was a new take on the Firefly origin story. There were some things about that episode that worked well for me, and there were some things that I wished had been a little bit better. One of the things that was a real challenge for them on production of that was because there were so many fire effects. They were like, how the hell are we going to do this? And one of the great things about working on this series was they never said, no, you can't do anything. They always said, we'll figure it out. And in this case, I think Kurt Gaeta directed this one. And the fact that we had so many scenes taking place in the mid-conflagrations was really a huge challenge for them. And what he figured out doing was, rather than doing effects animation in a lot of scenes, they did new color palettes for the characters. And so they did basically new model sheets that had fire effect lighting on them. And so they were painted with oranges and browns and yellows and things like that to indicate that they were being lit by that. And so they were able to, just by changing the way that they painted the things, and then they put sort of like a heat filter over it and stuff like that, they were able to make it so that they were able to do that. And I thought that was brilliant, and it actually worked really, really well.
Yeah, actually, you saying that now, I remember that, and it's similar because we've just reviewed the Beware the Grey Ghost for the podcast, and there are similar scenes with Batman lit by the Mad Bomber when the bombs explode. He's lit in that like orange hue and everything, and it instantly stands out where you're like, whoa, that looks cool. And that's exactly what, you're right. That's what they've done in the Firefly episode as well. I think that's a great effect.
The one thing that was disappointing to me in the episode, well, there were two things. One was that Cassidy, the singer, was supposed to be a big, huge pop star. And I wrote the song that she sang and had a certain sort of vibe in mind for the song. And it didn't end up that way. And what happened was that Bruce was driving his children to school, and they were listening to Britney Spears on the radio. And Britney Spears just really annoyed him. And so he was like, I want to make her like Britney Spears, and I want to make her really annoying.
Right, okay, I see. All right, well, that explains a lot about that character then, I guess, in that episode, in like her attitude and how she interacts with people. And
so the obsession that Firefly had with her was based on from my point of view, was based on the idea that she was really talented and that you could see somebody falling, becoming obsessed with her. But then when you like see her singing this awful song, it's like, why would anybody care?
It's so funny though, Rich, is that you're right. It is an awful song, but it's one of those awful catchy songs. So my brother and I will sometimes say to each other, like, we'll sing like, play with me and you play with fire. know, like we love doing that because it's a ridiculous tone and beat to it, but it's catchy and I remember it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's so.
No,
I know it probably was better in your head. I'm sure it would have ended up better, but yeah, it's catchy. I will give it that.
I remember Shirley Walker coming up to me and saying, oh, I just recorded your song there, and it's just like ridiculous. she was so excited about it. I mean, she absolutely achieved what Bruce wanted, but from my standpoint, the story might have worked a little bit better if if it hadn't been that.
If it had been, if she would have been someone that you could, as you said, totally understand why the Firefly would be obsessed with her. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So my other disappointment with that episode was that originally I had conceived it as as not a 2-part episode, but one that would have a sequel to it. And the idea that I had was that Cassidy was so traumatized by this experience that she had with Firefly that she would become obsessed with fire, just as a way of trying to master her fear of it.
Okay, cool. I like that. Yeah, that sounds cool.
And that she would become the next Firefly.
Ooh, that's cool. I like that. That's fun.
Yeah, well, yeah. I liked it too, but Alan and Bruce thought that's even a little too dark for us.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I maybe at the time, but yeah, I mean, I can see that happening definitely in Batman because it's the sort of like the victim then becomes the villain. I dig that. That's really cool. I like that story.
Yeah.
And then with the Creeper and introducing a very different, very unknown. I would say he's probably the most unknown Batman villain to me, the Creeper at the time. Compared to all of the other Rogues Gallery villains that we saw. But instantly stood out, was great fun. So what do you remember about conceiving that story for that episode?
Well, I was a big fan of Creeper because it was one of Ditko's first things that he did after he left Marvel and went over to DC. And it was his own, it had nothing to do with Batman. It was his own thing. And it was just a weird Ditko thing, And
yeah.
And I always found that to be fascinating. And so when they said we're going to do the Creeper, I sort of had the same reaction that you did, which was, what? We're doing the Creeper? Really?
Right.
And so I wrote a treatment for it that laid out basically what's in the story there. And the problem that we had was that the Creeper is such a strong character that it was very difficult to make it a Batman story. It was a Creeper story.
Yeah. It was an origin story and he's not really a villain, is he? He's like
no, he's not.
He's a hero more than anything. Yeah.
Yes, he's a hero, which was what he was in the comic books, and so that one sort of kicked around on the back burner for the whole time that we were in production. And it was, as I said, the idea was that he was going to become part of the Bat family in some tangential way, but because people were not sold on the idea that it worked as a Batman episode, it sort of just kept getting pushed back into the schedule. Right. And so finally we got like towards the end of the schedule and like, we haven't done the Creeper yet. We need to do that one. And finally we just said, oh, screw it. We'll just do it this way. And by that time I was busy on other things. And so Steve Gerber wrote the script, and I think Stan Berkowitz edited it. So my contribution was sort of like, I knew the lore of the Creeper and I knew sort of how to lay the story out so that we told it, but then they sort of ran with it and added all the fun elements of, great dialogue, great humor and stuff like that was all from them.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And of course, like, I love how he's in love with Harley Quinn. You know what I mean? Like, yes. she's always pining after the Joker, and obviously he doesn't feel the same way about her. Yet Creeper feels the same way about her, and I love that love triangle that's going on there and such. Like, I think that was very well done. That's really clever. Yeah, it's a great episode, and I remember being like, "Who's this guy?" as a kid. But after seeing it, I was like, "That was fun." Like, I like seeing it's like it's another Joker, but it's a totally different person. So it's a totally different attitude that he brought to that insane mix of chemicals that turns you into a bleached skin maniac, I guess. Yeah, I thought it was great. So that's cool.
But again, the idea was that he was going to be sort of like this. Another vigilante sort of good guy, but one who was off his rocker and that would cause Batman a headache.
I was thinking when you said he almost was a part of the Bat family, or at least in one phase or one treatment, and I was instantly thinking, I was like, I'm so glad that didn't happen, because Conroy's Batman, it would have just been too jokey, dealing with like this like kooky maniac, constantly like annoying him. It would be very like it would be like Freakazoid, right? Like another Bruce Timm thing. And it would have just it would have been too much for that show. So I'm glad he wasn't a part of the Bat family. That's still really interesting to find out. So there's an episode. I don't know if you like talking about this episode, but I don't know why it gets a lot of not a lot of flack, but it's not as loved as some of the other ones. But there's Mean Seasons, which is an episode that no one really talks about that much.
Mean Seasons. I love Seasons.
I do too. Let's talk about it, because I don't think many people talk about this episode, and I think it's a good one. So what can you share about that episode?
Well, again, as I told you earlier, I was going deep into the index of the rogues gallery, and there was one a calendar man who was a really stupid villain that they had, and of course, I brought that up, and Bruce said, "No, we're not doing that. That's stupid." But there was something about it that was sort of tickling around in the back of my mind, and then I thought about making it Calendar Girl and what would be her thing, and this idea of revenge for having been slighted over the years came up, and so I wrote the basic treatment for that, and then Hilary Bader came in, and I think she did the full outline and wrote the script, and she brought just the perfect sensibility into that thing. She dealt with issues of ageism and sexism in a way that was light years ahead of its time. I mean, the fact that we were doing that at that point was true, was just remarkable. And she came up with the idea of her Chippendale henchman, which I loved.
Yeah, that was fun. That's a bit Batman 66, and I love that.
Yeah, well, I mean, at one point, the Penguin had some sexy girl henchmen and stuff like that, and so this was just a way of doing a flip on that, which is why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. No, I love that angle of it, and I love her expressionless mask. Like that she wears, and the fact that she's not scarred at all underneath. And that she's just gotten a bit older, but she sees herself as this broken, old, like nobody wants me type thing. Is very clever.
That was a thing that Bruce stole from Jack Kirby, actually, which was Jack Kirby's idea was that Dr. Doom, underneath his mask, that he thought he was so hideous that he just has like one little scar or something like that.
Yeah.
And so he was sort of riffing on that.
That's
there was
cool.
Another point I was going to make on that. This was really an all hands on deck thing. Also, in the network premiere scene, we actually went to parties like that for the WB, and they were these huge overblown things, and so we had fun sort of parodying that. But those little clips that they showed of the shows were Paul Dini contributed those that which I thought were hilarious. The teen cop and the model school and all of that.
Yeah, that's right. I've just remembered those. Those are fun. Yeah, all of the like, here's what's to come this summer, and it's like, that's a lot of fun. That's cool.
Exactly. and the dinosaur scene was partially because at the time Jurassic Park was sort of like a hot thing, and so we were like, yeah, we can do dinosaurs. And it's like, wait a minute, the Batcave is supposed to have a dinosaur in it, and so we can do a story that would be a nod to that, that might explain why there's a dinosaur in there at some point.
Again, I love that because they did the giant penny and almost got him, and that's why he's got the giant penny in the Batcave. But where'd the T-Rex come from? And you guys answer that, and I love that. And that's one thing. Like when I said Mean Seasons gets a fair amount of flack, when I say flack, I don't mean it. I used the wrong word there. It's an episode that gets lost, right? In like the pantheon of episodes, the great episodes, the ones that like stand above the rest, that people watch all the time. That's one that gets skipped, kind of like in the first iteration of Batman the Animated Series with Baby Doll. Like that episode,
yes. That one's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. It's got the same feeling as Mean Seasons about this tragedy of this person that is like completely seeing herself as someone different than the way the world sees her, and she wants revenge, all of these things. It's similar beats, but as a kid, I guess that's not what you're soaking in when you're watching this stuff. But that's what I love about this show, is because there's so many different episodes for so many different levels of age as you go on. Like there's episodes that I loved as a kid, and then when I was a teenager, I loved a set of different episodes, and then when I was a young adult, there was a different set. And now, as I call myself an adult, but I think I'm still just an overgrown kid. But my point is that I see the layers in Mean Seasons, I see the layers in Baby Doll, and like episodes like that I have a huge appreciation for now. So yeah, I think Mean Season's great, and the fact we know where the T-Rex comes from is just another extra cool fact that you guys layered in there. So that's great. So
the other thing about that one is it's a beautiful looking episode. It's the Japanese director and unit that did that was their A team, and it just came out looking fantastic.
Yeah. I it's so interesting because obviously the new Batman Adventures has the style that fits with when it went from Fox Kids over to Warner Brothers, and you have the Batman that now lives with the Superman, and they look like they're from the same world. And I loved all of that. Is there any iterations of characters that you prefer from the original animated series? And is there any iterations of characters that you prefer from the new Batman Adventures when you look at them? And if you're like, I don't want to answer this, then you can you can be like, I don't want to answer that.
No, I think it was a bold move for them to redesign going into the new adventures, because everybody knows what Batman animated looks like, and it was really taking a risk to do that. And yet both Bruce and Glenn Murakami said that it was stupid not to use the lessons that they had learned over the years to try and improve it. And Bruce is always, one to never settle for where you're at right now. It's like, how do we push it? How do we make it better? And so, the biggest criticism that they had was that this version of the Joker didn't have red lips in it. But he's so sleek looking and so sort of sinister looking. It's like, yeah, I mean, he's pretty good. And then when we went on into Justice League, they sort of dialed it back a little bit. And so it's a sort of combination between the two. And I think that's where they hit the sweet spot on that version of the Joker. But yeah, I like the designs of this. I thought, like Two-Face looks amazing in the new animated things. And
Batman looks amazing too.
Batman does too. And sort of to my point about production, if you are really serious about going back and looking at some of those early Batman animated episodes, he looks a little lumpy in some episodes. Whereas this, he's got those sharp angles and everything like that, and he looks very sleek all the time.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, because in the older version, Bruce Wayne, we were just talking about this recently. Actually, he's got this brown and mustard yellow suit that's very bulky and big. Like, he's got the bat suit on under there, basically in the cape, because it was so bulky, and he looks like this big square with feet. But in the redesign, they give him like a black suit and red tie, and like they give him the angles, and like the torso is thin and the shoulders are broad, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, he's wearing a suit that actually fits him. That's nice. Like, that's good to see as well.
He has enough money to have a suit that actually fits.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree with you. There's some major changes and there's some minor changes to characters. Like Harley looks the same, and stuff like that, because her outfit is just perfect. But I think the Joker, you did it. He is great in the Batman animated series, and then the changes were a bit too extreme. Like, he had these like black eyes, and I know it was because he was like a great white shark type thing. I think I've heard Bruce Timm say that once. But that combination of taking that sleekness of the new animated and then combining it with like the yellow eyes of the old and like giving him red lips. So in the Justice League, yeah, he looks really menacing in that series, and I think he looks great.
One minor thing is that in the New Adventures, Batman doesn't have the yellow around the bat symbol on his chest.
I love that. And also, he's got a belt with pockets.
Yes.
Which I love too.
Yes. And so that sort of goes back to my childhood, which was when I was a kid, he didn't have the yellow bat symbol. And then when the TV show came along, they added the yellow symbol. And I always thought that was not right, because if you're trying to like skulk around in the shadows, why do you want to have a bright yellow thing on your chest?
Yeah, that's a fair point. On a side note, someone, I think it was Kevin Smith, tried to make a story with that yellow symbol, which is and also Frank Miller did that before in The Dark Knight Returns. It's a target, you know what I mean, and it's like it's got like bulletproof vests and stuff like on it. But as a thinking device for that character, like skulking around, you don't want something bright yellow popping out. Like Robin's in bright yellow and red and stuff, and you're like, what are you doing, dude? Speaking of, actually, good segue. Speaking of Robin, you wrote Old Wounds, which is one of my favorite episodes. Seeing what happened to Dick Grayson, why he left Batman and became Nightwing and no longer the sidekick. That's one that stands out to me as like one of the best of the series, because you've been watching these characters, for years, from Batman the Animated Series to the new Batman Adventures. And when he shows up at the end of the Tim Drake episode, Sins of the Father, and he's got like the mullet, and you wrote that, and then you got to continue on and write the story of why he left as Robin. Did you pull from comics for that? What inspirations when you were crafting that story did you have?
Well, again, we were tasked with sort of figuring out this whole Bat family dynamic. And we had a lot of discussions about how Barbara got integrated into the family. How was that going to happen? And again, what caused Dick Grayson to leave? And so those were the sort of two big questions that we had hanging over our heads. And we proposed a lot of different scenarios for it. And I proposed that Batman brought Barbara into the Bat family, and that it caused a rift with Dick because of that, because of his feelings for her. That made sense to me. Paul Dini had a different idea, which was this idea that Batman had gotten to be too much of a badass, too focused on his thing, and had this idea for this scene of Batman beating the crap out of a thug in front of his family and in front of his small child.
Right.
And Alan, ever being the diplomat and the genius behind the scenes, said, well, why don't we do both of them?
Yeah, exactly. Combine them. That makes sense. Give him more reasons to leave. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had these sort of like two half ideas that we sort of fused together, um, and it worked out pretty darn well. I'd have to say,
Yeah,
that
man. It's one of the most watched episodes of the new Batman
the thing
Adventures.
is that like Batman is very hard ass in this episode, and the things that he does to Dick in that episode really are unforgivable, but understandable. And from Dick's standpoint, it's like, why do I need to put up with this anymore?
Yeah, it's
Just
true. Yeah, yeah. He's not.
it,
He's not like under his wing anymore, as far as like being adopted, and he's not like a kid in the sense he's graduated and he's an adult. Yeah, it
yeah.
makes a lot of
So there's
sense.
so there's a lot of complex feelings there, but for our purposes, it did a lot of the heavy lifting of what we needed to do for the series to make sense. That
Mm.
it answered those questions that the audience might have about Barbara's position, why she's in the Batcave all of a sudden, and why Dick isn't.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I love that you don't answer that right away. Like you're watching the show and you're watching all these great episodes, but in the back of your mind, even as a kid, I'm like, so why did he stop being Robin? And then eventually when that episode came, I just remember being like, that makes perfect sense and just loved it. Like I love when he he punches Batman. He's just like, I'm not taking this anymore. And he throws his mask and his cape off and he's done. Like he quits,
Yeah,
and that's such a great scene. I love that scene so much, and so well performed by Lauren
yeah.
Lester. Like what a great Robin. Yeah, I think it's just a fantastic episode. When I saw that you were behind the story on that, I had to chat with you about it because it is like one of the big ones that everyone watches and talks about still.
Yeah, and the fact that Bruce is sort of redeemed a little bit at the end by the fact that he helps support Connor
He hires
over
he
the
hires the guy, yeah, as
he gives him a
security.
life and all of
Yeah.
that, is really sweet, and that is opens the door that allows Nightwing to rejoin the family, basically.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because they see the bat signal at the end, and they both fly off together. Tim Drake and Dick Grayson both go towards it together. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a fantastic episode, and it's such a great beginning, middle, and end. It closes out just as well as it opens. Yeah, I think it's a really good one. And then finally, I really wanted to chat with you about Two Face in Judgment Day because, again, I mentioned Two Face is a great character for this show, so well done. Way back from when Randy Rogel and Alan Burnett first came up with his split personality and that whole angle to the character that has been utilized in other shows and films since. But there's only so many stories. I remember Alan Burnett saying there's only so many stories you can tell with Two Face, like Clayface as well. But this I thought was great because it delves back into his psyche. So with Judgment Day, you create a whole other personality for Two Face, and also, do a pretty damn good job. Like as a kid, when at the end I'm like, okay, it's gonna be this guy, and then I was like, wait, it's Two Face. Is this judge like? It was like a who done it where I was like, oh my god, that was so. What memories do you have in the? Where did that story come from, and what memories do you have writing it?
it was inspired. Uh, Going back to you had earlier mentioned Alan Burnett's Hitchcock influences.
Right.
Um, it was influenced by Psycho, actually, and it occurred to me that Two Face has this split in his personality, but the Harvey Dent side always gets outweighed because he's all about justice and the application of justice and all of that. And I
Mm.
thought about, well, what if that side of his personality split in half again, and that the Two-Face side of him isn't aware that there was this split on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, just you describing it, and I know the story, but I'm like, it's such a great idea, man. It's so good. I love it so much.
It made a lot of sense to me. To some people, they didn't like the idea because they said, well, he's Two-Face, he's not Three-Face. But
That's crazy.
That's fine. But it was an idea that really resonated with me, and I was glad that Alan liked it. I wanted to sort of go back to my beginnings with Batman, which was my first memories of Batman when I was a kid. The first Batman comic book that I got and remembered reading was a giant-sized annual called The 1001 Secrets of Batman and Robin.
Okay.
Which I'm going to show you right here. This is a reprint of it.
Oh, you know what? I've seen that cover. I remember as a kid seeing that cover as well. What? Yeah, that's a great cover. I love that.
So, what this had in it was the origin of the Batcave. It had strange costumes, all of his costume variations and things like that. It had thrilling escapes from like death traps and stuff like that. It had amazing inventions like him flying around on, I don't know whether you can see this, but he's got the bat glider wings.
Oh, yeah. That's cool. Yeah.
Right there. And I realized later on that like all of the episodes that I wrote had elements of this kind of stuff. It had the giant props inside it,
the T-Rex, we just talked about that, right? The T-Rex in the cave.
Yeah.
Where did that came from?
So this episode for me encapsulated a lot of what sort of was ingrained in my brain as like the quintessential Batman. So it had no Robin or Batgirl in it. It's a strictly Batman story.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So it's old school from that. It has a huge cast of rogues gallery in it.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of different villains.
Lots of red herrings. Yeah.
It has a mystery. He's a detective who's having to solve mysteries. He's having to use his computer files to figure out what this prop was. I remember a Batman story where he goes into his files to determine what kind of hammer the villain was using, and so it sort of harkens back to that. So it has all of these elements that I associate with it. So to me, it's sort of like the ultimate Batman episode. Now, the big element that Alan added to it was the Councilman Corcoran character and the whole sort of political sleaziness and back dealing that he was doing, and that added a whole nother level of sophistication to the story.
He's a great character and a great red herring in that episode. And also, it's funny that Alan Burnett added to him because it's very reminiscent of another character from Mask of the Phantasm, that that guy, I can't remember his name now, that character's name, but he's basically a sleazy guy that's like, he's in love with Andrea and he could be the Phantasm. It's not until the Joker poisons him and you realize, he's actually been collaborating with the mob and he's the reason. He's a red herring, but he's still not clean by the end of it. He's not a good guy. There's dirty stuff that you find out, just like with Cochran in Judgment Day. Yeah.
So I thought that helped the whole thing come together. And I used to always joke that, I was the guy who killed Batman because that's the last episode of the animated Batman.
So that was going to be my question is, I assume, like most shows, you didn't know that was going to be the last one at the time. No. Yeah. I don't think you killed Batman at all, man. I think that episode as the one that you go out on is, especially with what you just described and made me realize, Batman on his own, there's a mystery, going back to a lot of the basics where it started with Batman the animated series is Batman on his own and there's a mystery and he's trying to solve it using his detective skills. That was some of the core elements that they started with in Batman the animated series. So with all of these changes and all of these amazing storylines and all of these characters that you brought in over the years, I think that's fantastic that it's quite poetic. It gets to end like that, and just a one crime whodunit Batman story with a really cool twist with Two-Face being the guy, and he doesn't even know he's the guy. I love that.
Yeah, it's And for me, like I was saying earlier, because I hadn't worked on the earlier iteration of Batman, having the opportunity to do a solo Batman story was like really special to me.
It's what you've been waiting for. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's fantastic. Just remembering other scenes like, Two-Face going to the Penguin because he's like an underground arms dealer, which I always loved that where they took the Penguin in the new Batman Adventures. He's this nightclub owner, but he's actually selling arms to all of Gotham's criminals. And Two-Face comes and he buys that stuff, and then suddenly the Judge shows up, right? Like after Killer Croc has been there and all of that. And I think that's really clever because you don't think like, oh, Two-Face has left and then the Judge has come in, they must be the same person. You just think like, oh, this is the story that we're telling. And especially with the trap door and Two-Face like being like, oh, there's a way out. Oh, wait, it's blocked. How did he know about this? Yeah, it's a fantastic episode. So my hat's off to you, Rich, because
they made a good call in that they cast a different actor to do the Judge's voice. Yes. Because they really did not want the audience to be able to pick up on the fact that this was Two-Face, and so that was another red herring that just sort of led you down a different path.
Absolutely, and much like with, again, going back to Mask of the Phantasm doesn't have Andrea Beaumont's voice. It's a completely different voice, so you're throwing off the scent. Brilliant stuff.
One of the things that I found interesting, though, is that like a lot of the ideas that we came up with in the animated series have gone on to become part of DC lore in other venues. So you see, I mean, like Harley Quinn showing up in the comic books after being introduced in the animated series, and the TV series Gotham actually took a lot of stuff from the animated series. And at one point I was watching it, and Michael Chiklis was playing a character who gets this same split in his personality and becomes a version of the Judge. And I remember watching it, as at the time, it was like, oh, are they really going to do this? Are they really doing this? Yes, they're doing it.
Right.
And he's sort of like a mixture between the Phantasm and the Judge. And obviously they watched it and were fans of it and found a new way to iterate it, which I love.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you just brought, like, I haven't even really put it together, but like you created a new villain for Batman. The Judge is a new villain. Even though it's Two-Face, it's not Two-Face, it's a new villain. And he's a very cool villain because, again, he's judge, jury, and executioner, right? Like he's just there he's not out to rob or anything. He thinks he's doing the right thing, but he's an extreme version of Batman, which is always interesting to see when people go too far thinking they're doing the right thing. And he looks cool as well. Like he looks like, like one of the ring race out of Lord of the Rings with like a judge hat on and stuff like that. Like, no facial features, just this dark silhouette. He's really cool and got different weapons that all are to do with like the court and law and such. So he's a great villain. So thank you for sharing all of the behind the scenes stories on all those episodes. I guess what I usually like to do is, I ask, I think you've kind of already answered this, but maybe there's more. Are there any stories that you ever wanted to tell? You told me about the Firefly and the continuation of that storyline. Is there any others that maybe you never got to tell that you wanted to?
I was really interested in trying to do something with Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
Okay.
With the idea being that they had a psychic connection between them, and that Batman couldn't pin anything on them because if one did something, the other one could claim he was someplace else and be able to corroborate the story. And so there was a whole thing about that, but we were never able to sort of like make that story work. But I always liked those characters.
Yeah, that sounds fun. That sounds cool. That would have been really interesting. I mean, again, you hear things like Tweedledee and Tweedledum, but then you did so many random characters and gave them such a great spotlight that I'm sure that if ever it was made in DCAU, I would have been like, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, who are these guys? Watched the episode and been like, well, they're awesome, and now I love them as well. So a lot like the Creeper and all these other ones. That's cool.
And we did write an outline for a Copperhead story also that never got made.
Oh, I think I heard. Was it maybe Paul Dini that mentioned that once? But yeah, that would have been cool as well. That's another random villain, but yeah, I'm sure would have been really cool to see. So yeah, we've had quite a few guests on this show, and they've all shared some amazing stories about working with the late great Kevin Conroy. We've also just sadly lost Arlene Sorkin as well, which was really sad to see. And there's been an amazing, there's been just an amazing fandom online of just people just, praising her for her work and essentially lending her voice to, the creation of Harley Quinn, because without Arlene Sorkin, we wouldn't have Harley Quinn, and the attitude and the tone that she brought to that role. And you even wrote some Harley Quinn stuff, obviously, in World's Finest, and I'm sure other episodes like The Creeper, obviously. But are there any memories that you have that you can share with us of either Kevin or Arlene with your experiences working on those shows?
Well, Arlene was so special because that voice that she created was so specific and so full of joy and life that it made that character what it is. And ever since then, anybody who's done that voice has had to sort of lean to what she did. It's pretty iconic. And the same thing with Kevin too. I mean, his interpretation of Batman was very, very well considered, and he understood that character inside and out. And going to recording sessions, I never had a line that he struggled with. He knew exactly what to do with it, and it was great. But I worked with him for many years, and I always found him to be, although very pleasant, he was a very private man. That he didn't share a lot about his life because he was at a point where he did not feel comfortable with sharing who he was.
Yep, absolutely, yeah.
And yet I also remember that, like, going to the Emmy Awards and stuff like that he showed great kindness to, like, he took my mother under his wing at the Emmy Awards and was like, well, sit with me and let's talk and all of this. And she was just smitten with him, because he was so generous and giving with his time. And the fans have found that later on when he started going to conventions and things like that he really was genuinely interested and had a genuine humanity about him, and that translated into that Batman voice.
Yeah. I mean, he was a true superhero, wasn't he? He really was. Just what a dude. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I love that with your mum. That's just extra special because it's like Batman's, talking with my mum and making her feel welcomed and comfortable. That's so nice. Now, I obviously see some really cool memorabilia behind you, Rich. What's some of your favorite things that you've kept from the show, where it's everyone's favorite segment where I get to see some cool stuff and I only get to tell you about it because it's an audio only podcast?
Well, I'm a big Jack Kirby fan. And so the Superman cell that is over the mantle there has Supergirl and Apocalypse and Darkseid and the Parademons and all of that. And so a big part of what I did in the Superman series was bringing a lot of the Kirby.
You wrote the Apocalypse episodes, didn't you?
Yeah, I wrote a lot of the Fourth World stuff that's in almost all of it that's in the Superman series. And so that cell is very special to me because it sort of represents all of those things that I love.
And then what Kirby created, and then you get to write for. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. It's a great looking cell as well. What else we got in this treasure trove?
the Batman Beyond mask that's hanging on the wall is sort of my tribute to the Stalker, who was a character that I created who hunted Batman.
Yep, much in the vein of sort of Craven the Hunter, but for Batman Beyond, which I love.
So I've got Batman Beyond's head on my wall.
That's awesome. What he always wanted to do. Yeah, that's great. I love that. Exactly. Yeah, and you got some great figures back there and some statuettes. I love that stuff.
Dan Reba sold me the Superman maquette because I wasn't on staff the first year, and so I didn't get that the first time around. And he's like, "Well, you have to have one," and I got an extra one, so here. And I was like, "Oh my God, thank you so much! I can't live without that."
Dan is just one of the most generous dudes. Like, when he's been on the show, but also when I have like questions, he's always happy to answer them and like give me his time. And he's got an insane amount of memory and knowledge of all that stuff. Yes. He's such a good dude. That's great. So can you share with our listeners what you're working on now? What's going on currently for you?
Well, for the past few years, I've been working on a preschool show called Octonauts Above and Beyond. This is an extension of a show that has been popular for the past 10 years called Octonauts, which was about the short pitch is that it's sort of Star Trek underwater. It's about a group of scientists and adventurers who go underwater and interact with all of the weird, real sea creatures that there are on the planet, and we learn about all of the amazing abilities that they have. And in Above and Beyond, we expand the cast a little bit, and they go up onto land, and they begin to interact with land creatures, and particularly it has a lot to do with climate change and how that's affecting these creatures' environments, and what we can do to try and minimize the effects of climate change.
Oh wow! Okay, cool.
And on the creatures, and so that is going to be premiering on BBC on September 25th. New episodes, actually on September 11th. Some episodes that have been on Netflix are moving over to BBC.
Okay.
And so if you have kids, check it out. It's a really fun show.
That sounds awesome. Yeah. And I've got BBC, obviously. I'm in England. So yeah, I'll definitely check that out. Well, Rich, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure. I really like some of your episodes, man. Like I said, are just the highlights of the new Batman adventures for me. Episodes that I've watched so many times. So to understand like the person that crafted those, and to hear some of the behind the scenes stories I've never heard before. It's been a pleasure. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much for asking me, and thank you for being a fan.
Yeah, of course, man. When we come to some of your episodes, maybe we'll be able to have you back so you can talk about it more when we're reviewing those episodes. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Well, that was fun. Who's for Chinese?